Hello, folks. It is Friday, and we are wrapping up the week with our Food for Thought session. So I lost Jeff Ed for the week, and something a little different today. We're changing focus and talking about workout nutrition. So looking a little bit of sort of sport and exercise when we're training. What do we need to do? And I'm going to touch on a few different things in that space. How to eat well daily and get the most out of your exercise sessions and what that all kind of means. So check in, swipe in, say hi, let me know how your week's going. You might be in week 3 of your challenges, and quite important after 3 good weeks. If you're halfway through a 45-day challenge, maybe a little bit of thought into what's happening around workout nutrition is going to help as well. So hopefully it'll be useful. Or when our next set of challenges come through, you can start thinking about what to do, eating around your training and exercise, and those ones as well. So let me know who's all here. Pat Govinder's here saying hi to everybody. So hello, how's it going? And I've got a little set of slides that I'll bring up in a minute, and we'll go through that. So everything, if you're just training in now, workout nutrition, sport and exercise, what it all means, kind of who actually needs to eat a little bit differently, and what to do. If you've got any questions, please pop them into the comments, and I will answer them once we've gone through everything. Amisha's here as well, saying good day to all. Lovely. So let me jump straight into it, and I'm going to bring up a little presentation for you guys, and we're going to go through everything that is sport and exercise nutrition, workout nutrition. So what is it all? Essentially, workout nutrition, what we're looking at is specifically the timing around exercise. So before, during, and after training, is there anything that we need to do differently, or a bit of a focus that we need to put into our nutrition when it is before, during, or after training? I like to look at it sort of 2 different ways, but to give you a little bit of context here, typically for most of us, if we're going to be eating a balanced meal a couple hours before a session, staying well hydrated during it, and having a balanced meal after a session, you're going to be ticking most of your boxes. What exercise nutrition goals are all about, I'll get to, but for most of us, just eating well throughout the day means we don't necessarily need to focus too much on what we're doing immediately before, during, or after training. But if your training load increases, for some of us, if exercise is new, there's maybe a few things you can do nutritionally to help. But as your load or volume increases, or if you're an athlete or you've got very specific goals, starting to pay a little bit of attention to your exercise nutrition can help. It also can offset a lot of behavior later in the day that might be adverse to whatever your goals are. But one thing that can get in the way is if we're not eating well before, during, or after training, we might not be getting to whatever our goals are because there's a speed bump in the way. So a few things that I'm going to pitch here to you that might just need a bit of thought. But at the heart of it, if you're able to keep your daily intake in check, you're most probably going to be pretty close to achieving what you need to in terms of supporting your exercise. I use a pyramid here to explain a little bit about the importance of workout nutrition. And the base of any pyramid is the most important thing, and that's your daily nutrition and health. I'll get into the details of each of these in the next couple slides and minutes. But underpinning everything in your success and your performance in your training sessions and getting the most out of your fitness or strength goals or toning goals or whatever it is going to rely on your daily nutrition and being healthy. Right. The other things are less important if you can't get that right. The second thing will then be the macronutrient split. And a macronutrient is carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And I'll talk a little bit about how we might play around with them to enhance your workout sessions. And then the timing of it is actually when you're doing that. How close to exercise? What is this? Often hear about windows and all that sort of thing. How important is the actual timing? But timing's not as important if you're not getting the right macronutrient split. And that's not as important if your just daily intake and health isn't in check. So that is a simple pyramid for the way I like to look at workout nutrition. So breaking it down, what that daily nutrition means. If your food quality, food volume, and daily habits are out of sync, out of check, if there are issues there, you're not going to be getting the most out of your training sessions. So Food quality, what that means is trying to get the best out of what you have available to you, choosing very good quality options, staying away from refined sugars, for example, or saturated fats or poor quality fats, or not having enough fiber in your diet, or whatever the case is. If your quality of the food that you eat isn't optimal, it's going to impact your training and workouts. If your food volumes aren't right, if you're eating too much or too little, your training quality is also going to be impacted, but that's going to not only impact how well you can get through a session and recover, but also whatever your goals are. We've spent a lot of time talking about things like energy balance and sort of chronic dieting and under eating for a long time and the downside and the risks to that. But if your food volumes and your portions aren't right, you're not going to be able to get the most out of your training. So you've got to get that right. And then if you've got any goals in terms of changing body composition, toning, losing weight, picking up weight, it's going to come down to food volumes and how much you're eating. So you need to make sure that that is right before focusing on immediately before, during, and after what you're doing with your session. And obviously underpinning it all is your habits. So what are your eating behaviors like? What's your relationship with food? Are you all over the place? Are you consistent? Or what's it actually looking like? So your habits, your volumes, and your food choices are going to be the most important in terms of reaching your goals and getting the most out of every training session that you can. What I say is that health comes before performance. You can't perform optimally in a training session. You can't get the most out of it if you are unhealthy. So it's got to be the most important thing that you rely on. You've got to be healthy. You've got to have your energy. You've got to be fit and strong, or else your training's going to be suboptimal. You're not going to develop. You're not going to get as fit and strong as you want to. You've got to be functioning properly as a human before you worry about getting the absolute most out of it. And also to do that, it's going to be about avoiding deficiencies. So if there are big gaps in your diet, if there's certain things missing, if you're cutting out food groups, or if you're overly restrictive, maybe you're deficient in, we've done a little bit in this as well, but things like iron or vitamin D or whatever the case is, going into winter now, possibly a topic I need to speak a little bit more on is that. But if you're deficient in something, your health is going to be suboptimal. Your performance and training is going to be suboptimal. What you want to achieve out of a workout is going to be below par. You're not going to get as fit and as strong as you want to. So start with the foundations. Get your daily nutrition right. Get your food quality and volumes of food right. Have a good relationship with it. Our first principle of looking at your food, at nourishing you and having a good balanced plate. It's the most important thing to make sure that you're training hard and you can get the most out of it, is getting your daily nutrition right. All right. Then we might break that down and look at macronutrient splits. And this starts to become important. Once we've kind of got the foundations right, we can then improve on that and get more out of our training or more out of our daily goals by moving things around slightly. Right. And the main thing here is looking at how we support the energy demands of training. So if you're only training half an hour a day, for example, it's very different to if you're doing an hour or an hour and a half, or you're doing 2 sessions in a day. You've got to understand that the more you put on your body, the more important nutrition is going to become. But also, when we take it away, we need to look at how we balance that out with nutrition. And the simple example that I give here is more training means more fuel, and our food source of fuel is carbohydrates. If you increase your training, you need to increase your carbohydrates. Or else you're creating a bigger and bigger deficit. And we know that there's a lot of downside to doing that. So as soon as your training starts going over 60 minutes, or you're doing multiple sessions in a day, you need to make sure you're putting in the right fuels to help fuel that session, get the most out of it, but also help with your recovery and your health and all the downstream elements that it's going to have as well. When you're resting, when you're injured or your training volume is dropping, similarly, that energy-rich food needs to drop as well. And this is, you hear Jono often talking about periodizing training. When you're planning your training sessions and you're going through a training block, and how important it is to build on and have rest days, and your training's going up and it's building like that. But the same actually needs to happen with your nutrition once you've got your base. So you're going to be as consistent as you can for as long as you can. But as soon as you increase the stimulus, your nutrition needs to increase a little bit. If you take that down because you're injured, you're sick, you need to shift your focus, and the energy demands needs to drop with that a little bit. So that's one place that you might play around with your macronutrient splits a little bit. And that's the energy-rich carbohydrate side. Protein, which is also going to remain relatively consistent, needs to be at the heart of what we're doing to help our workouts. And I'll talk about that in a second. But what's important is that we have enough to support recovery, to help maintain lean mass, the bit of your body that you're using during exercise, your muscles. What your muscles need to recover after a session are amino acids, which come from protein. So they need to be in your system to be able to get the most out of it, to get fitter, to get stronger. You need the building blocks of that. And it's one of the reasons why I talk about protein, fiber, and fat being the foundation of every meal. It starts with protein. When you follow any of our programs, if it's on a challenge, if it's on the one-on-one, you'll always see there's a protein component to that. Because we're exercising, the most active part of our body is our lean muscle. What we need to help it repair and recover is protein, plus a lot of the other benefits that come with that. If you're new to training, you actually need a little bit more. The more conditioned you are, the better your body is at using the available protein to recover, to repair, to help with that. So you get away with having a little bit less. But if you're new to training, you actually need to have slightly more. Again, why it's a focus for a lot of what we're doing, because for many of us, we are still new to it. And that's why we need to drive it in as a focus. And when you're trying to look at changing body composition, you're going to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. And protein becomes more important when you're in a calorie deficit as well. So once you've got your foundation right and you can understand, well, if I'm training more, I need to eat a little bit more energy-rich foods. When I'm training less, I need to drop that. But I also need to focus on my protein and make sure it's a foundation of every meal. The third macronutrient is fat. And that's there to either help us to get to our energy needs, or we can take a little bit out and it helps us to create a calorie deficit where we've still got the energy to support training, but we can drop our fats a little bit because we want to be in a calorie deficit, but fat's not really going to improve how hard you can work out or the quality that you can get into, but it's there for a health perspective. It's going to help with recovery. It's going to help with inflammation. There's some important healthy fats that are going to contribute to your underlying health. So we still want it, but it's choosing good quality and just being aware of your portions because it's the most energy dense of our macronutrients as well. So that's how we might start looking at splitting up macronutrients based on whatever your goals are, what your training is, and if your training is increasing or decreasing or where you are on your journey. All right. Timing then becomes the interesting component to add on to that. So we've got the base right. We know that our food quality and volume and portions and our behaviors around it are good. We've now played around a little bit with our macronutrient splits to understand a bit about protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Now it's right, well, when do I need to do this? So if we go back to understanding that for most of us, just having good balanced diet is pretty much going to get the most of our training sessions, we can then split it up effectively throughout the day. And I like to use about a 3 to 4 hour gap to show whether a meal was balanced and to get the most out of it. So to be effective in terms of our nutrition, if we're giving our body the opportunity to nourish every 3 or 4 hours, we spot on. If you're getting quite hungry within that window, if after 2 hours you're getting hungry, it means that the meal that you've had is maybe not sufficient to meet your energy demands, whatever you're doing in terms of training. But if you can eat within that sort of 3 or 4 hour period, it should be all right. And it should also mean that it's going to tick the box of having a decent daily meal 1 to 2 hours before a training session and 1 to 2 hours after that. If you're eating every 3 or 4 hours, that means if your training's in between that, you're going to have something in the tank, which means you're going to be able to train harder. And you're going to have something a little bit after that, which means it's going to enhance your recovery. And you're going to be 90% of the way there. That's your daily intake. If we need to then dial it in a little bit and we start looking at sort of timing around a session, and if we need to do a little bit more to specifically support it, we might look at a pre-workout window. And that's anything from immediately before your session to about 2 hours. The further away you go from training, the more balanced that meal needs to be. It's going to reflect breakfast or lunch or whatever the case is. You want every component to be on the plate if it's about 2 hours away. All right. The closer you get to training, maybe the more you need to just focus on it being about a little bit of energy to help top it up and get your session in. So you're going to be looking at predominantly at whether it's needed. And I'll talk to that now when I break this down slightly. But why we want to eat before a workout, what we can actually do. During a session, again, is do I actually need it? What do I do to support my training to get the most quality out of it? And your post-workout is going to mimic your pre-workout window, where it's anything from naught up, sort of immediately afterwards, to 2 hours after that. So that's how we might break down the 3 sort of times around it. And that first one being pre-workout, what might motivate that is it's all about whether it's going to help us train harder, get more out of the session. That's what pre-workout nutrition is for. It's there to make us train harder and get more out of it. Like I said, it might be a balanced meal if it's 1 to 2 hours before. And what's going to dictate what and how you do it is assessing if you're able to train harder because of it. So in my challenge, for example, it's just been running, and in the last week of it, I've been trying to get people to think a little bit more about how their body reacts. So if, for example, you're someone who's always trained on an empty stomach, have you tried introducing things that you can tolerate and found that you can train a little bit harder because of it? If you simply can't, the ultimate goal is to be able to train as hard as you can, get the most out of it, have consistent energy throughout the session. So if that's with or without something beforehand, that's going to be the first thing that dictates it. But you also need to maybe play around with what that thing is that you're having before a session, because typically having some fuel in the tank is going to allow us to train harder. We're going to get more out of the session. We're going to be able to adapt better because of it, as opposed to training fasted all the time. So if you need to play around with it, there's some things that make us tolerate food a little bit better. And quite often we won't eat before a session because something sits in the stomach and we just feel like we can't exercise. And the common things there might be if there's a little bit of fat in the meal, if there's some fiber in the meal, and sometimes it might also be dairy related. So those are things that might take a little bit longer to digest. If we're eating close to exercise, we want something that's quick to digest. So if it's fluid-based, so it might be a smoothie or just a drink, it could help. It might be something that's lower in fiber, that's got a little bit of fuel, like some bananas, or it might even be a refined carbohydrate. Because if you can train harder after having a slice of white bread toast, for example, as opposed to not having it and having a subpar training session, I'm going to tell you that that slice of white bread toast or that rusk that you really feel like is actually useful because you're training better because of it. So that's how we want to think about the food that we have before a session, is how can it impact the outcome of what I'm doing, as opposed to the bigger picture where your daily intake is about weight loss, for example, or weight gain or something. But how you're eating around training is about supporting your training session. So think about it in that sort of aspect. Why I want to talk a little bit about fasted training is because it's got a lot of downside to it. I mentioned to you during training, your body's using muscles, and what that needs to help repair is a little bit of amino acids, which we get from our protein. If we're training in the morning and the last meal we had was dinner last night, we've got this big window that we haven't eaten anything, and your body actually might start to break down a little bit of muscle. So if it's a 30-minute session, cool, you might get away with it as long as you eat something decent enough after that. But if that's every day, or if those sessions get longer, or you're doing multiple sessions in a day, doing them all fasted means your body's just more prone to stress, to damage, to break down. You're not going to be getting the most out of the session, and the chances are you're going to be delaying your recovery because of it. So having a little snack beforehand can help in that instance, and it means that, one, you might get a better quality session, so you're going to get fitter and stronger because of it, but because you've also got the building blocks in your body while you're training, you're going to be able to start using those a little bit sooner, as opposed to waiting maybe an hour or two after that session that you've actually been able to eat anything and initiated that progress. So I'm not a fan of fasted training regularly. Doing it once or twice might be okay, but because we want to get quality out of our sessions, because we want to recover properly and repair and get everything going, I like to play around with what we can eat before sessions, maybe even during them or after, as soon as possible, so that we can initiate the processes that we want to. During the session, I've broken it down into kind of 3 different things. And if it's less than an hour, you're going to get away with just having water. There's nothing worse than someone starting a training program, all of a sudden you see them at the gym, they're on the treadmill and they're sipping on energy aids because they think they now need to get this into their system. And the chances are what they've put into their mouth, they haven't got anywhere near burning during a session. If it's less than 60 minutes, rather have something beforehand so that you can get yourself going. You've got a little bit of fuel in the tank to use, but you'll get away with a little bit of water. If you're struggling, some electrolytes might help. If you're new to training, or if you're in a calorie deficit, or you may be a bit dehydrated or sweat a lot, you could add a sugar-free electrolyte to your water. It might also just, the flavor might help you take it on, which adds value there. Or what's quite interesting, to improve the quality of a training session, you can actually use like one of those energy aids or power aids just as a mouthwash. You don't want the calories because you still want to keep it in check, but actually just swishing the carbohydrate around your mouth is some interesting research to show that it can improve performance. Your body thinks it's getting fuel, so it thinks this training session's a little bit easier. So you can actually use it to your advantage in that way, where you get some of the workout benefits from it without getting the calories during the session, because 60 minutes doesn't really need it. As we go a little bit longer, we might need to do that. So if it's between 60 and 90 minutes, I've just said have a couple small mouthfuls of something, either a drink or something to eat, whatever you tolerate, whatever sits well with you, and you can still train. Because after 60 minutes, you might start to flag, and you might not get the same quality out of your session. Once you go beyond 90 minutes, it becomes quite important to fuel. So not many of us watching here, our training programs would need that. But if you're doing anything supplementary, you're doing any endurance work, some running or some cycling or whatever the case is, you need to really start thinking about what you're taking on during those sessions once you go beyond 90 minutes. And it's anywhere from 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour is what you're going to take on. But that would need sort of a bit more of an individualized focus. After a session, firstly, there's no magic window. Everyone says there's this window, it's 30 minutes or it's an hour or whatever. It hasn't really been proved by any good research. What's prudent is if you haven't eaten anything before a session, the sooner you get something in afterwards, the better. It's going to help balance your recovery process, your blood glucose levels. The chances are you're going to be less prone to a poor choice later in the day. But if you haven't eaten anything before and you haven't eaten anything afterwards, the chances are you're going to pay the price for that a little bit later. And if that's every day or every week, it's going to build up. So try get it in as soon as possible, particularly if you haven't eaten beforehand. If you have eaten something beforehand, you've actually initiated the recovery process just by doing that. So your window is a bit extended. So you get away with maybe having an hour or 2 hours before you have a balanced meal after that. But post-workout, your goals are to rehydrate, repair, and refuel, the 3 R's of it. And rehydrate is get some fluids back in. So make sure you're getting some fluids of whatever kind. Water's usually the best, but it could be dairy-based, and you get a little bit of protein from it as well. If you're having your meal, just make sure there's a fluid component in that as well so that you can help rehydrate. Make sure you repair by getting some protein into that. So again, going back to the mixed meal, balanced meal, typically there's going to be some protein, which is great, and refueling is about carbohydrates. So whatever your plan says you require, you're going to get a carbohydrate of some form. So typically it might be breakfast or it might be lunch. And on most of our programs, you've got that. If you're training in the evening, it also might mean that you've moved some carbohydrate to dinner instead, because it's going to help with your refueling and recovery process. If you've got 2 sessions in a day, this becomes even more important because you're replenishing in that window, and that's also going to help you in the second session that you've got later in the day. You've got that energy back into the tank so that you can get the most out of it a little bit later. So protein and carbohydrates as a mixed meal is what you're kind of looking for. And like I said, there's no magic window, but there is the possibility of using sort of what I've called food alternatives, but it might be a shake or a meal replacement or something. And that becomes most useful when that time period after an exercise session, just there isn't any food available. So you're in the car and you're getting to work, or you're getting the kids to school and you've trained and you haven't had a chance to eat before and after. You might need to start thinking of something that's a bit more practical, a protein shake or a protein carbohydrate meal replacement, depending on what your goals are. And it can be useful. It's no better than food, but it can just be practical in that instance. All right. So To sum it up, wrap it all up, most important thing is to focus on your day-to-day nutrition. If you don't get that right, your workouts are going to suffer. Right. But there are some things we can do to enhance what we're doing around workouts, and some things you can maybe think about for yourself. And firstly, what are you doing before a session? Is your quality of your training impacted by what you're doing? Because the goal here is to try and support your training session as best you can, to get the most out of your sessions so that you can get fitter, you can get stronger, you can do the most. If you're looking to lose weight and create a calorie deficit, don't do it around training, do it in the day. You've got many other opportunities. You can rather take a little bit away from lunch or dinner or something, but rather try and get most of your fuel and your good nourishment, your good nutrition around your training. So you can train as hard as possible, you can burn as many calories as possible, and that's what you want to do with your workout nutrition. So focus in on that and maybe see where you're going wrong. What are you doing during your session? Are you taking in unnecessary calories? Are you well hydrated? Ask yourself that. And are you able to get some recovery in as soon as practical afterwards, so that, yes, you're going to help your adaptation to training, but it also means that you're not going to pay the price later in the afternoon when you start getting hungry because you've had too much of a gap around your training. So a little bit of food for thought, some things that can hopefully guide you in terms of maybe where you're going wrong, and what you can work on to overcome it. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing there. You can bring me back into screen, and I'm just going to try and catch any questions that might have come in while we were going through that all. I think there's just a lot of hellos and how everyone's going. Someone was halfway through the Table Mountain Challenge and going well. So prime example, 45 days of a good training program. And these things are important because that structure's there. You need to make sure you're thinking about, am I getting the most out of every one of these sessions? If you're on a 21-day challenge, you've only got a few, so you've got to be getting the most out of them. Over 45 days, if you're doing something wrong, all those little things are going to add up over 45 days. But every time you're doing something right, it's also going to add up. So you've got a lot of opportunity to do things right. All right. Lots of hellos. Penny, how's it going? Nancy, swiping in. Larissa, how's it? Siri, hello. Danelle wants to talk on iron deficiency. I've actually done one on iron deficiency. You can go and have a look in the Jeff Ed bank of things. Went through some stuff there. Siri, loving the talk, and a few of you are going to be catching up later. So no questions, which is great. So hopefully it was nice and clear. If you've got any questions, guys, please feel free to send them through. Anything you want to know. It's been a little bit of a down week. We're on, it's holidays and it's all sorts of things. It's the last week of April, but no excuses, guys. Make the most of this week. If you're finishing off on your challenge, you've got a couple of days, and we've obviously got Jeff Games tomorrow morning, which is going to be epic, and an opportunity to do this. So because Jeff Games is also about a performance, you want to set the mark, and every month you can kind of reassess it. It's an opportunity to see how your nutrition can impact that. So if you're doing it fasted all the time, you might find from minutes 30 to 45, you're going to start struggling. So there's some big AMRAPs at the back of that. But if you're feeling well during the session, you're well hydrated, but you've had a good breakfast beforehand that sits well in your stomach, that you're able to train on, that's maybe low in fiber, low in fat, but got some fuel for you, perfect opportunity to give it a bash. And every month you can see how you're developing and how much harder you're able to push because of it. So start tomorrow's Jeff Games well fueled, keep well hydrated during it, and looking forward to seeing those numbers that come up on the AMRAP. If you exercise daily at 6 a.m., would you have to wake up and eat at 5 a.m.? Tolerance is going to dictate what that time is. So some people can literally eat 5 minutes before the session, and that's great. If you can, that's super. The closer you get to the session, because time becomes an issue when it's early, it's just your choice of what that might become. So like fruit's a little bit easier to tolerate. My example of like white bread or a rusk or something, obviously it's not the healthiest food, but it's able to get more training quality out, so it serves its purpose. And fluids are often a little bit better tolerated. So if it's a smoothie or a drink of some kind that's got a little bit of energy in it, can help. And you're going to just use yourself as a trial and error. What sits well in my stomach? What can I train hard if I have it? And how close can I actually have it to my training session that I'm still able to get the most out of it in that way? So play around with it and see how it works for you in that instance. What would I suggest for someone running a half marathon in around 2 hours? Marmite, Sami, or a Goo? Do you mean on or before? But both of those would be good options either. So running, for example, I'm a big fan of taking a Marmite sandwich with me when I'm out on the trails. Brilliant. There's a little bit of savoriness to it, but you get the energy from the carbohydrates in the bread, which is cool. You don't get taste fatigue. Goos and gels are fine. They're a good option because they're readily available source of carbohydrate. But for a lot of people, they don't sit well in their stomach because it's very concentrated. So with gels, you normally have to take some fluid. You need to make sure that you're getting fluid at the same time to get the dilution right, to get absorption best. But what you're going to be able to tolerate is always going to dictate which of those options you have. So how your body reacts, what your stomach's like before that. Danelle, how long beforehand do you have to eat? The closer you can eat beforehand, the better. But the further away you have to push it is just going to be based on how quickly it digests and how quickly you can push yourself again. Minnie would love a talk about foods for a multi-day hike. We're going to do the Otter later this year, which is a super one. And that's, maybe we can also just chat about it. Minnie, some good ideas around that and using food as fuel and what sort of things you want to be doing because you're also carrying it and what it all goes around. So it's an area of passion of mine, in fact. So we can definitely do something in that space. Guys, lovely. I think that was all the questions. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Looking forward to seeing you guys with us tomorrow morning for Jeff Games. Remember as well, we've got our Level Up one-on-one promo going at the moment. If you want 25% off your first month, you can jump onto that. A lot of you will be finishing off on your challenge and asking what's next. So there's the code over here. You can see it. So go and jump on there. There are just a couple of spots still left. We're almost at the end of April, so it's going to close up. Guys, I hope you've had a good April. And let's start setting the bar for May, what we want to achieve, the goals we want to do, and what we need to put in place to get there. Look forward to seeing you guys a part of that. And in the journey, we can play in the nutrition space for it. So we'll see you tomorrow. And next week, back in the swing of everything's Meal Prep Monday, our Jeff Cook anniversary. We've been doing it for a year, and we're going to be live from the Western and doing a cook-off with Coach Tony. And then next Friday, another food for thought. So I'll see you guys all then. Have a super Friday. Catch you all soon.